Mikado brings to mind sweeping orchestrations, charming romance, and biting wit. Since 1885, it has been one of the most popular pieces and the most widely performed piece of the Gilbert and Sullivan canon. The Mikado has worked its way into popular culture at nearly every turn. You will find reference to a short, sharp shock in Pink Floyd's song Us and Them, the music of Three Little Maids between scenes in the HBO sitcom Curb Your Enthusiasm, and admonitions to let the punishment fit the crime in United States Supreme Court rulings. Quite a wandering career. But let's back up a little for some historical perspective. In the 1850s, Japan had ended its 220-year-old policy of national seclusion. In 1854, trade relations were opened between Britain and Japan with the signing of the Anglo-Japanese Friendship Treaty. The name Friendship Treaty suggests that the new friends were meeting on equal terms. In that context, certain humorous choices, such as calling the attitudes of the gentlemen of Japan queer and quaint, or describing an abject grovel as a characteristic Japanese attitude, may seem like nothing but a light ribbing from one new friend to another. In reality, the relationship between the two nations was imbalanced. The agreements were written to heavily favor British interests at the expense of Japanese self-determination. So, even at the time the Mikado was written, Britain poking fun at Japan might have felt to many Japanese less like a gentle ribbing and more like a jab from a bully. Indeed, British dignitaries sometimes seemed aware of the possibility that the Mikado may not have been entirely innocuous. In 1907, the British government banned public performances of the opera during the 6-week-long visit of Prince Fushimi Sandonaru, son of the real Mikado of Japan at the time.
Life is a joke that's just begun.
This is relevant to GNS performers in the US because similar bullying has occurred on our own soil. In 1875, the Page Act effectively prohibited the entry of most Chinese women into the US. This was followed in 1882 by the Chinese Exclusion Act, which extended the ban to Chinese men. For decades, these and subsequent laws perpetuated hypersexualized stereotypes of Asian women. In this context, things like the name of the Mikado's ingenue, Yum Yum, helped to normalize dehumanization. But the best-known expression of the dehumanization of Asian people occurred during World War II towards Japanese Americans. U.S. federal and local governments, including San Francisco, removed Americans of Japanese descent from society and forced them into internment camps. Much of this history is unknown to non-Asian Americans, and it isn't just history. Fast forward to our own day. Hate crimes against Asian Americans have been on the rise. Satire of the GNS sort takes on a much darker tone when you know, and care, that the people being used to unwittingly represent a source of innocent merriment are also targeted by economic disempowerment, forced removal, and violence. The least we ourselves can do is to be cognizant of our own conscious and unconscious biases and racial prejudices. Historically, productions of the Mikado have been produced using primarily white performers in yellowface, a form of cultural appropriation, which is the practice of using another culture for one's own interest. Just as the practice of blackface is wrongfully used to impersonate black people, usually in an exaggerated manner, yellowface is the practice of using makeup, costumes, speech, and mannerisms to mimic those of Asian background. Both blackface and yellowface have historically been used in grand opera as well. Another common practice is whitewashing, eliminating or notably reducing the presence of people of color in any role, regardless of setting. Outcry against these production techniques drew national attention in 2014, when the Seattle Gilbert and Sullivan Society came under fire for continuing to use yellowface, as well as cultural appropriation, in their presentation of the Mikado. When Lamplighter's planned to present the Mikado as their 2016 summer show, they knew that these issues had to be acknowledged. When approaching the new Mikado, One idea was to set it in Victorian England as the English National Opera did in 1986, since the root of the story, like all Gilbert and Sullivan works, was to satirize English society. But the feeling was that something would be missing if the story were simply moved to Victorian England. Taking Shakespeare as an inspiration, Lamplighters hit upon the idea of transplanting the story to the lush and exuberant setting of Renaissance Italy, which allowed a neat substitution of Milan and Milanese for Japan and Japanese, along with a set of Italian-inspired names. This allowed 98% of Gilbert's words and rhymes to be preserved, and ultimately, to give contemporary audiences the chance to experience the opera as both the familiar piece they love and also something thoroughly fresh. Even with these successes, Lamplighters recognizes that this was not the final word. Not the new Mikado, but a new Mikado. Our treatment of the show will and must continue to adapt and evolve as the world does. And now, the big question. What's next? This is a question that must be asked for both the Mikado and the Gilbert and Sullivan canon at large. While the new Mikado had one of Lamplighters' most diverse choruses yet, we recognize we must make further efforts to ensure our casts, technicians, creative team members, and leadership reflect our diverse San Francisco community. This ongoing effort is underway across the company as a whole. So this raises the question, what would an anti-racist Mikado look like?
I think an anti-racist production, by definition, has to grapple with the racism of the piece, of the culture from which it came, and the racism of our time. And this is that is difficult, that is uncomfortable. I was sort of thinking, well, what if it was staged? The staging was that we, the audience, are seeing through the fourth wall an early read-through or a tech run or something of a production of the Mikado circa 2020. And the actors come on, and whether they are actually Asian American performers, or whether they're white or it's mixed or whatever, I would envision Asian American characters in the cast portraying actors in this production, and their discomfort or rage or whatever at what this is. And that's imposing kind of this whole framing thing, which may not be tenable, but it struck me as one possible device. I thought the scene in Topsy Turvy, the movie about the sort of fictional movie about the making of it, the Japanese no, Japanese yes scene, where they've dragged several Japanese people who are in this kind of display, this thing where they're on display as this is a Japanese setting, and here are real Japanese people, and they're brought in and they don't speak English, and they're shown the scene, the Three Little Maids scene, and the director and Arthur Sullivan are arguing about, is this Japanese enough? And they keep turning to the Japanese people and saying, is this Japanese? And they don't know what the hell is going on. And that scene for me, it's funny, I laugh at it, but it's edgy, it gets at so much of it. That's an anti-racist scene that I enjoy.
When a show gets labeled problematic, many folks will say they do not get the gist. We are not colonists. There will constantly be people who defend the older ways. No, it's not racist. They're Swiftian satirists, but it's far more likely someone Japanese will see the show than for little Lilliputians to pick up a Swift novel and try explaining to the Asian audience who came how NANKI-POO and Yum Yum are authentic Asian names. I guarantee that after that encounter they'll insist to be off the email list. Unsubscribe them from the list. Just take them off the list. Just take them off the list. You can't come back from this. That Chinese guy is pissed. If you're creating art with a satirical intent, allow me to insist that artwork should exist. Just be certain to interrogate for whom the art is meant, or else the point is missed. And what I mean is this: if you're skewering a system of oppression in your play, and when writing your libretto you believe the only way to make a commentary on your culture's silly rules is to make another culture a parodical footstool, when punching up or down note the direction of the fist, reject supremacists, continue to resist. Continue to resist, evolve, create, persist, continue to resist, continue to resist.
Lamplighters embraces GNS, and we also embrace social justice. The responsibility of critical examination is part and parcel of our search for dynamic possibilities to continue presenting this work. The beautiful music and witty lyrics and dialogue are worth preserving, and its valid jabs at bureaucracy and effective social satire is timeless. As a Gilbert and Sullivan company, we owe it to W.S. Gilbert to do as he intended, to carry on his mission of skewering appropriately for the times we live in. With joyous shout and ringing cheer,